My mother and father came to Tramore in 1948. My father came to mind cattle. He was supposed to the precursor of a farm manager, and during the war, my father had worked in tillage. Himself and his cousin had the concession for TVO, which was the forerunner to diesel, and it was only certain people got it, the scarce resource. And himself and his cousin and a few other people, they would go around the big farms in County Meath with a couple of tractors, a caravan to live in, a couple of ploughs, disc harrows, and a sewing machine. So they'd till the land during the war. That's what they were doing because fuel was scarce. So they would give all the concession to a certain number of people to make it as viable and as efficient as possible. So I suppose after the war, he was out of a job because everyone had fuel. And so himself and my mother then, she was from County Meath as well, North County Meath, and they came to Tramore as the farm manager, and they were here a while, and I suppose it wasn't going that well. It wasn't, children started to arrive, and I suppose it got expensive. So they lived on Main Street, but they saw someone up around in Summerhill who were cooking chips in a saucepan and selling them. And they must have been old or went out of the business, so they said, I wonder would this be a good idea. So they had rented a house down on Main Street, right beside where the shop was. And so they got a saucepan and cut up the potatoes, cooked them in the saucepan and started to sell them. And I suppose that was 1948. People would come to Tramore on their holidays at that time, and they'd stay for a week or 2 weeks. They wouldn't be like the transient people that we have now. And they got going at it. And after a while, about 2 years, they bought an electric cooker for cooking chips. And this was a major development for them. So in 1951, the shop next door to them was for sale. It had been a bakery, and the fellow who owned it actually was called the Blah Whalen, and it was closed for a while and derelict. So they bought it for £450, and they bought a bigger cooker for cooking the chips, and more helpers seemed to come along. We were all born upstairs. Nurse Minnie, who lived down the road, she delivered us all, and my mother, I suppose, took the day off when the event was happening, and the next day she just continued on. And the people around the street, there were a lot of people living on the street at that time. As a matter of fact, all the houses were full of families. And I'd say if we were writing our story at the moment, we'd say we were probably deprived of our parents because it was all the neighbours who minded us. Particularly a lot of girls who lived around and were 4 or 5 years older than us. There was the McGraths up the road, Patsy and Maura. There was Mary O'Connor, who lived in Patrick Street. She seemed to be minding us quite a bit. And a few more of their contemporaries used to bring us out and bring us to the beach. And my mother and father would work every day. They never had a day off. And these people just used to mind us. But I think that was the normal thing at that time, where neighbouring children who were a year or two older would mind younger children. And that seemed to have worked okay. We've survived this long. So
when you were born then, they had the chip shop.
Oh yes.
And can you remember the very first memory of the chip shop for you?
I can. It was a very small shop, and when I was 7 or 8, I remember my father doubled the length of the shop, went back into the house, and we used to sell cigarettes and sweets as well. And we continued to sell sweets and cigarettes up until the early 70s. And we stopped selling them one night. a fella got 10 carols off us. And the carols were, 10 carols were 2 shillings and a halfpenny at the time. And he never came back and paid for them. So we said at that point, nobody ever asks for chips on credit, but they do for cigarettes. So we said, this is not a good business to be in. So we gave up as a result of that. Now, I can't name the individual. He went to England afterwards, not because of the 10 carols, but we said, this is it, finished, we finished
He
this.
still owes you the money.
He still owes the 2 shillings and a halfpenny. That's what 10 carols were. But when we were small on the street, obviously we were interested in sport. And there were so many families living on Main Street and Market Street that we were able to field a team in the street leagues, in the Gaelic, 15 players. So we could get at least 15. Now I think there are only 4 houses occupied on Main Street as far as I can see. But we had the good ones, which were a big help. Now there was 9 or 10 of them, so that boosted the numbers. And we had the Connollys, of course. There was plenty of them in it across the road in the pub, and a few more people like that. But we used to all go up to school together. We'd gather up and go up to the brothers. We'd come home, of course, for our lunch. We were able to come home for our lunch. And when we were in the shop, when the shop was open and we were going to primary school and that, on a Friday the shop would be open at lunchtime because of the meat ban. And we'd run home from school, get behind the counter, help our mother and father for 20 minutes or so, then get a few chips ourselves and head back to school. So that's how we got into the business. Then in the mid to late 60s, Michal and I both gave up school and fell into the job. So we just continued on from that.
And come here, your parents obviously, because it was a family business, you probably didn't see them very much apart from behind the counter.
No,
Yeah.
they were always busy. I don't know. It didn't seem to affect us. We seem to have had a wonderful time. They seem to be wonderful people. They were very kind to us, and they were strict, but we were deprived of nothing. I remember when we were going to school, a lot of people didn't have bathrooms. But in my lifetime, and I'm a 51 model, we always had a bath, with running water. And I discovered as I was going through primary school that not everyone had a bath. And I said it to my father one day, I said, do you know what? I said, we are very rich. And he said, why? I said, we have a bath. And I said, I've discovered a lot of people in my class don't have a bath. And he brought me up and he showed me the bath, and there was a crack on the corner of it. And he said, I bought that bath as a second for 10 bob off a fella who worked in the bath factory in Ballyburry, he said. That's how we have this. Not that we're rich, he said, but we bought that bath for 10 bob. And I put it in myself, he said. And so we're not rich.
And what kind of hours would they work? What was it typical?
Well, the shop would be open. It would be open from 5 o'clock until maybe 12:30 every day. But they would have 4 or 5 hours preparation. But what they used to do is, every morning they'd go to 8 o'clock mass. No matter how late they were, they'd go to 8 o'clock mass. And at that time in the 50s and into the 60s, we used to go in and out the shop door. That was the hall door as well. And they wouldn't even lock the door when they were going to mass. And when they'd come back now, we'd probably be in bed and getting up, and everything would be okay. But now you couldn't leave the door unlocked. But they used to just go. But they never missed 8 o'clock mass every morning. And of course we had to go then as well.
So in a way then they had mornings off.
They had some time off in the morning, yes.
And then they started then after lunch.
In the afternoon. They do some preparation in the morning, and they'd very often go to Waterford to to Hearns. They used to shop in Hearns and Shaw's quite a bit, and this is how they used to do it. We had the sweets. We used to get them off a fella called Ned Hartley. He had a sweet van, and he used to come out to us, and he'd give us sweets, and we'd always be asking him, "Have you anything new, Ned?" And Ned was a very amusing fella. If you know him, he'd say, "Yeah, I got a new toy last week," or "I got a new shirt." And we'd say, "No, have you any new sweets?" So that was that part of it.
And just the fact that they were busy, the parents and all that, did that mean that you had a lot of freedom to run around and?
Yes, we did to a certain extent, but we were restricted by they tell us when to be in, and of course they monitored our progress in the house as well. But we had a field behind us, which is now where the boxing club and the Garda station. It was a field, it seemed to be owned by nobody, and we used to have. Well, we didn't play football in it, but we used to have races in it, steeplechases. And we'd have the Marcus Street children up, the Kileys, the Browns, and we'd have the Goodwins, the Connollys, we'd all be in there having races. And we'd, at numerous occasions, usually around the time of the Grand National, we'd build fences and we'd have a steeplechase. And we could climb over our back wall and go in there. And
did you have TV at this stage, or was it radio most of the time?
Oh no, this is pre-TV. Okay. We had the radio, and we used to listen to the sponsored programs before we went to school and that, you know. But the first television, as far as I can remember, came on the street was Paddy Crane's mother and father bought a television. They had a bed and breakfast 2 doors up from us, which was called Western Villa. And they were so kind that we didn't have a television. Michael Rahr, who lived up the road and was a friend of ours as well, in the evening time when the Lone Ranger would be on, we'd go up and knock on the door and we'd say, "Mrs. Crane, any chance of us coming in and watch the television?" She says, "Certainly." And we'd go upstairs to their sitting room. They wouldn't be there. She'd turn on the television for us, and we'd sit down and eat sweets and watch television for an hour and a half. Then when it was over, we'd say, "Mrs. Crane, we're going out." She'd go up and turn off the television. But it'd be hard to imagine you'd knocking on someone's door at the moment and said, "I want to watch your television." But we used to do that. Michael Rahr was with us in that escapade, and Brian Welsh across the road, who in latter years appeared in the Titanic as a musician, and he used to join us over there as well.
And presumably because you were in the centre of town, you can remember all the shops that were there at that time.
Yes.
And some of the shopkeepers. Who would stand out in your head, different people that were around that time?
Well, there was a lovely sweet shop just below us. Beside us on the lower side were the Stubbses. That would be Noel Stubbs' grandfather. And below that there was the Bijou. And there was 2 Miss Welches owned the Bijou, and they used to have lovely sweets. And we used to, despite the fact that we sold sweets, we used to go down and buy sweets there because hers seemed nicer. One of them was a Jubilee nurse, and the other minded the shop. And I remember one time they were from Cork originally, and during the war I think they were over in Manchester. The nurse was needed in Manchester, and I remember one day we were down there and we were probably bowled in the shop, you know, and Miss Welsh had some adult, she was serving some adult there. And I suppose because she was from Cork and she spoke particularly well. It wasn't an ordinary Cork accent, it was the polished one. I remember her telling the adult there, for us to hear it, she said, "Cork people get the best jobs and keep them." As if to say the Waterford people are of intellectually inferior. But that was the Bijou. Goodwin's across the road had the milk shop, and they used to sell sweets as well. And then we had the Ledger, which was, we used to call it the Blue Lookout. Mrs. Power, who was from Galway, she owned it. And
why was it called the Blue Lookout?
Well, I don't know why it was called the Blue Lookout, but we used to call it. It wasn't actually the name that was written over the door, but locals used to call it the Blue Lookout. And that's what we refer to it as afterwards. It's called a Ledger now, and it's not open, but we used to just call it the Blue Lookout. All the adults call it that. Murray's Forge was across the road from that, right beside Goodwin's shop. And of course I can remember them shoeing horses, their horses coming down. I suppose it was the end of the farrier on having the forge. And then up above that we had Connolly's pub, and all the Connollys, there was about 8 of them in it, 8 or 9 of them in it, and they were contemporaries of ours as well, so we were over and back there. And of course the Connollys were in the same mode as we were. Their parents were full-time in the bar and full-time minding them, you know. So, and then above that, as you go up the street where Colin Morrissey is now, when I was very small, there was a fella called Billy Stewart had a grocery shop there, and it was the grocery shop of its time. But he died in 1953, and then the Welshes, Paddy and Eileen Welsh, took it over, and they continued it on, and they did bed and breakfast as well. And as we went up the street, then there was Smith's had a shop up where Jim Welch the butcher was, and now it's a bridal boutique. And I can remember them, they used to make homemade ice lollies. They had the moulds, supposed to put the water in and the cordial, and they'd make a stick. They'd cut it with a knife, I suppose, and you'd know it was, you know, it wasn't like the smooth thing you had now. But I was always afraid that I might get a splinter in my tongue. But coming back, going across the road again to Western Villa and the Cranes, where we watched the television, they used to do bed and breakfast. And people seemed to come and they'd stay for a week. But lots of people, country people in particular, they would come after the harvest, late August, September, and they'd bring their own food with them. And Mrs. Crane would cook it for them. And I suppose this would reduce the cost of their stay by bringing their own food. But it'd be all-inclusive, you'd call it now. But they'd have all their meals. And, when you go up around the corner then into Summerhill, Mrs. Winters, Sally O'Hare's mother, had the pub there, Robinson's. And we used to watch the television there in the evening. I can remember watching, they must have got BBC before anybody else, because I can remember watching television in the bar there, but on a Saturday evening. But once 5:30 would come, we'd be put out. But we were very appreciative of that. And above that then there was another sweet shop and a grocery called Doherty's. It's where Brennan's, the pharmacy, is now. And we used to go in there now on our way to school, particularly after lunch, to buy sweets on our way back to school. And then a bit further up we had Mrs. Brophy. She had a bed and breakfast. Seemed to have been a lot of bed and breakfasts at that time on that side. And then there was Lodge's Hardware, where the Bank of Ireland were, and now Barry Hartridge is. That was Lodge's Hardware. And John H. Lodge had a lot of property around Tramore, and he had a grocery shop across the road from it, which became a supermarket in its day. Then Darr's took it over, and now it's the track betting office. And above that, there was a Protestant church of a type up on the corner. And it was only knocked down about 25 to 30 years ago. But it was some kind of an offshoot of those Protestant churches. And when I think of the Protestant church now, I think of who lived beside us on the upper side of us on Main Street were the Barnetts, who were very good to us as well. Rita Barnett and her sister Vera, who was still alive actually, and I can remember them dressing us up for fancy dresses and that, and they'd spend time with us, and Rita taught us to swim, and she was a lifeguard, and anything about swimming now she taught us. If we were deficient in any way in swimming, she'd correct it for us. And I remember one day she brought us to a burial over in the Church of Ireland on Church Road. A Mr. Strangman from Knocknaree. He died, and we knew him, and she was very friendly with him. So she must have been in charge of us that day, and she brought. Remember, I was in the group anyway, went over, but we couldn't go into the graveyard. We had to stand on the footpath and look through the railing at the burial, and I thought it was strange that we weren't allowed in. I thought we must have been bold or something. Only I learned afterwards that we would have been damned if we had gone into the opposition faith. And but that stands in my mind now, looking as a small boy in through the railing at that burial, Mr. Strangman.
So it was probably your own family that would have objected.
Oh, they would have, but they were only teaching the doctrine of the church at the time. And my mother and father wouldn't breach any of the rules. They were very strict, but all parents were strict at the time. We were fearful of the consequences, now and in the future.
And what about the primary school? What was it like? What's your memory of the primary school?
Well, we first of all, we started in the convent with the nuns, and they were particularly nice. Then we went over to the Christian Brothers on Otterans Terrace, and Mr. Medlin was my teacher for a number of years in primary school. And then I can remember Brother Buckley, who was very, very nice. And my abiding thought of Brother Buckley was, my mother used to tie my tie every day for me. I couldn't manage it. So she tied my tie when it must have been hot in school, and I took my tie off. And Brother Buckley said to me, "Padraig, put your tie back on." And I said, "I'll do it later on, brother." He said, "Do it now." So I think I started to cry that I wasn't able to tie the knot on it. But when I got home, I did some practice, and it was never a problem to me again. But I can remember the leather. Some brothers were more difficult than others, but it wasn't as bad as what we hear about other people.
And where did you all go? I mean, you said you learned to swim from that lady, Mrs.
Yeah, Rita Barnett.
Yeah. Where did you learn?
Over in the Cove.
Okay.
And as we got bigger, then we had bikes, and we had more freedom as we kind of came into our early teenage years. And then we used to go over to Newtown Cove and the Gillamine. And there was 4 or 5 of us. Michael Rarna would usually be with us, and we'd go over there. The pier at that time, when we were 12, 13, 14, it began to get a little bit dirty. There was oil in the water, and we didn't like it. So we thought Newtown Cove was cleaner, and we'd go over that far. And we had more freedom as we became teenagers. So we had to do less accounting for our movements.
And just in relation to, I suppose, your early memories, just race week obviously was a big thing in Tramore.
Yes.
So what's your memory of it?
Well, my memory of it was, it would be our busiest week in the shop. And when I was a small boy, my mother and father, they wouldn't leave the shop during that time, except to go to 8 o'clock Mass. And I can remember race week very well when I was a teenager. And we seemed to be open late. The pubs had an extension, so we used to be open. Maybe the shop might be open till 2 o'clock in the morning, and there would be crowds in it. And I remember one night we had stools in the shop. We had 8 stools in the shop where people could eat their chips at the counter and have a glass of milk, as they did at the time, or a glass of Sidona. We used to sell glasses of milk and glasses of Sidona. And I remember one 15th. I couldn't believe how busy the shop was. I was only kind of getting into it at this stage. I might have been 12 or 13. And at the end of the night, we ended up with only 5 stools. 3 of them had been stolen during the busy hours. And nobody noticed anyone walking away with 3 stools. But it must have been a bit of a sight. Some fellas walking down the road with a stool each. But I can always remember that one. That one that sticks in my mind.
Maybe they went to England. Went to two shillings.
Yeah, I don't think it was the same fella. No, I'd love to name him now, but I just can't.
No, don't do that.
Yeah.
But I mean, would you ever have trouble in the shops then? Or
very, very rarely. My father was very strict, and the guards seemed to be more visible. Remember, there was a guard around Tramore, and he had an Alsatian. Guard Connolly was his name, and he had been a boxer in his younger days, and he still, people feared him, you wouldn't take him on. But he had an Alsatian as well. Now, I don't think the state were paying for the Alsatian. I think the Alsatian was just a pet that he used to bring for extra security. But the guards were very, very visible.
And where did you get your comics from when you were small?
Oh yeah, we used to get them down in Cal's. Well, it was actually Martin. It was Martin's shop, and Dermot Cal was looking after the newsagent's part of Martin's shop, which was also a clothes shop, and it was down where the charity shop is now, formerly Ladbrokes, and they were there. And just below it was a shop called Galeese's. Now, Joe Galeese was an artist, a very pleasant man, and he lived on the Church Road, but he had a shop there, and he used to sell shotguns. And we were fascinated by these, I suppose, late 50s, maybe up to as much as 1960. But then, of course, after that, then he stopped selling them, I suppose, for security reasons. But we used to be fascinated. We'd go in, and he used to sell artists' equipment, like sketch pads and crayons for writing and things like that. And he used to give art classes. I know some of my brothers went to the art classes. I obviously wasn't deemed artistic enough to go, but I didn't go. But that was Joe Galeese. And there was a shop down beside it then. The L&N were on the corner where the Chinese were, but below it was a shop called Charlie Matthews. He had another grocery shop there. And all of these people, the normal people, normally they lived over the shop. Obviously the L&N didn't, but Charlie Matthews lived over the shop, and we didn't seem to play with the Matthews because they were Church of Ireland, and we knew them to see them, and we thought they were superior people. Well, I did, and they weren't bold like us. They're probably better behaved. Then they're down on the corner where the Seagull Bakery is now. Malai's had a butcher shop. And further up where Tony's Takeaway is now, there was a butcher shop there called Plunkett's. The Plunkett's are, the children of the Plunkett's are still going around Tramore.
And what about down around in the amusements and all that area?
Oh yes, in the summer we used to when we had time we'd go down around. and we wouldn't be allowed to stay late down there. But we'd always be rambling down around, and we always refer to it, and we still refer to it as down around. And we used to go down to Piper's Field. There was amusements in Piper's Field, which is a car park now beside the amusement arcade, which was the Atlantic Ballroom. And I had a fear of heights, and I remember we used to go on the swinging boats. Swinging boats were swinging, you'd hold a rope, and if you pull, the harder you pull, the higher you'd go. And I always had a fear of that. We never seemed to have any money, but we were able to we knew the people, or the people who owned the thing knew our parents, and they'd give us a free ride. I can't ever remember getting money to go down around, but we never seemed to have missed anything down there. We knew Sammy Saunders. He had an amusement arcade there, and they used to sell ice cream. Whipped ice cream, which was very rare at that time, and I can remember looking forward to going down there and buying a whipped ice cream cone. That was a highlight for us. And if we had any relations there, and in our house we seemed to have an awful lot of relations would come and stay with us. Probably because we lived by the seaside and it was cheap for them to come and stay, and we even had a bath, so maybe a toilet as well. So we seem to always have our cousins coming to stay, and our aunties and uncles would come and stay with us. And they were a big help to us if we went down around. They'd buy us things, and they'd have money, which we wouldn't have as much. So they'd put us on things and that.
So when you finished in primary school then, did you go into the family business at that stage?
No, I went to De La Salle for a few years. And when I did my intercert, and a very poor one at that, I said to my father, look, I said, I'll give you a hand in the shop. And he said, no, you'll have to do your leaving. I said, no, I'm finished. And reluctantly, he agreed to it. And I was 15 then. I was smoking. So...
Were you drinking last day?
No. I didn't drink till I was well in my 20s. But I played soccer for Tramore. That was my most important thing. That I could play soccer for Tramore unimpeded by education. And we used to play up in Groan Park, the hilly pitch, which is a car park on race days now. And we used to play there. And of course, all my contemporaries played with us, the Goodwin, Bill Goodwin, Michael Rahr, a fella called Michael Lee, he was dead now, unfortunately. Martin Flavin, and Matt Keane played for us, the WLR soccer reporter. He played for Tramore under 14, and because some of the fellas going to school in Waterford met up with him and said, would you like to play for Tramore? And he said yes, and he did. And he played for a couple of seasons with us.
But Tramore always had good soccer teams, didn't they?
Yes, they did. They had a team that won some competition in maybe the Junior Cup of Ireland in the 30s. So that was the soccer side.
I mean, just you say the whole thing about boys and girls, where they met. Where was the scene when you were young? What was the...
Down around.
Okay.
That's where you might meet girls, down around. It was the Las Vegas of its time. And you might meet strange girls, that weren't from Tramore, which would seem even more attractive.
Exotic.
Yes, exotic. Though having said, when we were teenagers, we kind of got it. We were working in a shop helping our parents, and we spent more time working than we had been previously. We were more of a help to them. And though we did have bicycles, and we'd always nip out and have a swim in Newtown Cove, we'd follow the tides. The tide was in at 7 o'clock later. We'd be leaving the shop, and we'd go out and we'd have a swim and come back. sometimes people coming into the shop would call for us in cars maybe, and they'd say, "You come for a swim? We're going for a swim in Newtown Grove." One particular fella, Dan Dawson, used to always call for us. He'd pull up and he'd say, "You come for a swim?" We'd abandon all work, get our towel and towels, and go with Dan Dawson to Newtown Grove. He'd bring us back then.
Well, that was great.
Mm.
You got out even though you were working.
Yeah.
And did it change your relationship with your parents when you started working? Like in the shop, like, and everything?
No, it didn't. But they, at a very early age, they gave us more and more control. And my father in particular stepped back from the business. And it suited him fine. He had a farm in County Meath and he used to go up there quite a bit. And it suited him that we were there. And my mother, she loved the shop and loved the people. And though she wasn't an academic by any means, I suppose the two main things in her life was daily mass and the Irish Independent. Those were the two things, most important things to her. And I remember when I was 17, I can remember it vividly, one race week, we were very busy in the shop, and this fella came into her and said to her, he said in a Dublin accent, "Hello, ma'am," he said, "Joe died." Oh, my mother, I'm so sorry to hear that. So they got into a little huddle and they were talking for about 15 minutes about Joe and his death and his life. When the fella went out, I said to my mother, I said, "Who was your man?" And she said, "I don't know." And I said, "Who was Joe?" "I don't know," she said. But I said, "You were talking to that man that you didn't know about Joe, who you didn't know, for 15 minutes. And she said he wanted to talk about her. I talked away, she said. And I said to myself, this woman is not as foolish as I thought she was. She had the ability to talk. And I realised at that stage that the ability to talk is not an illness. It's a gift that very few people have. And I raised my opinion of my mother dramatically on that incident. It was a life changer for me now.
I mean, you couldn't have a business without having a relationship.
Yes, but my mother and father had it. And I was only afterwards that I began to look at things and how I dealt with them, and I'd say, that's how my mother and father used to do it. And another thing that my mother and father always did is, any customer that they had, they'd buy things off them. I remember now, if we were buying shoes, we'd have to buy them in Canterell's shoe shop in George Street because they were customers of ours. And they did everything like that. If you were a customer of ours, they'd buy things off you. Maybe it's something to do with their agricultural background or something, I don't know. But it was a very good practice. And Michal and I, when we were in the shop afterwards, we continued that. As a matter of fact, when we ended up, we had 3 solicitors working for us because there were 3 customers of ours. And that was their theory, and we carried it on.
And they gave you Irish names, is that?
Yes, we often tried to figure that out. My mother and father would have been leaving school at about 12, primary school. But my father's sister was a teacher. And we think it must have been her that asked them to call us Irish names. I was baptised Patrick, but I was never known anything, only Padraig. So that's probably the reason why they call us that.
And we were talking about something a second ago. It was my head is going on. Don't worry about this now.
Yeah, don't okay. It gives me a chance to wet my lips.
And also try to remember the stories you want to tell us as well. Try to remember.
I've included those already. They're all in now.
Right. No, but what were we talking about? The Irish names, but before that we were talking about something else.
My mother and father's job, Joe. My mother and Joe.
anyway, just go on where we were. So when you started working in the shop, and they started to show you a few things, what were any other lessons that they passed on to you that you kind of...
Well, they didn't show us anything. By the time we were in the shop, because we lived upstairs and we lived in the building, we knew everything. It was just an extension of ourselves. When we were in the night at home, in the shop now, if we were doing our homework, say, winter's night, dark, and if they got busy in the shop, they'd call us and we'd come in and give them a hand. That's the way it was. And I suppose it's like a lot of people in pubs. That's the way, that's how they can survive. They can call in the family suddenly at a moment's notice when they're busy. They help when that is, you don't have to pay them for half a day or the full day. And that's how, and I also think that, well, I must say, I quote from John B. Keane when he said, anyone brought up in a pub has a head start on everybody else. And we felt we were in the same thing, you know. You meet people, you meet them good and bad. Yeah, one thing I said it to my mother. My mother only died in 2006, but I said to her, and she agreed with me, that when we were growing up, people seemed to drink more, and noticeably. Now, you see more drunk people when we were younger than we did later on in life in the shop. Now, maybe people who were drunk stayed out longer, but they seemed to drink more at that time. You'd see more drunk people. That was just one observation. And of course, we used to live on the street, so we were immune to all kinds of noise and everything, you know. If there was a row on the street when we were in bed, we wouldn't even hear it. I remember one night the bin outside the shop was set on fire by someone. Now, I was living 2 doors up at this stage, but Michal was living directly over the bin on the front of the shop. And I said to him the following morning, wasn't that terrible about the bin? And he said, why? I said, at 3 o'clock, did you not see the fire brigade outside with the flashing lights and all that? No, I said, I didn't notice the thing. And he looked out and he saw the melted plastic bin. So you build up an immunity to noise and any kind of...
And was it a disadvantage then working in the sense of, like you were quite young when you got in on the business, did you have to kind of like, you know, watch yourself in the sense of like you couldn't be like normal teenagers out and about?
Yes, absolutely.
You had to be...
Yes. But we were born into it, so we didn't. It wasn't a major.
You didn't miss anything.
No, we didn't miss anything. But I can understand people going into businesses that they might have to work 7 days a week and they might have to work unsociable hours. How difficult it would be if you were used to a 9-to-5 job, and then you go into this. It would be a life changer. But to us, it didn't matter. I remember the doctor asked me one day, how many days a week did I have off? And I said, I don't have any days off. I said, if I was away, I wouldn't be working because I couldn't work. But when I'm at home, I'm just working. When I got married, I lived 2 doors up in the shop, but I could walk around the back. So if I had an evening off, and an evening off for me would be, I might finish at 7 o'clock in the night. And if they got busy, they'd call me and I'd go in and help them until they got over the rush, go back to what I was doing. So that's just the way.
And would you remember different people, would you know people's orders as you walk in, like in the head? Like?
Absolutely. Even at this point when we're 11 years out of the shop now, next month, a chap who worked with us for 20 years, Mark Crane, who now works for Dooley's, when we'd meet up with him, he'd speak about some fellow who was asking for us. And I'd say, describe him to me, Mark. And he'd say, he has to get a chip and 1 sausage, salt only. It's that fella. Oh, was he? How was he? So that's the way we would refer to people. And we might have, on a busy night when we were in the shop, we might have 500 customers. And if you ask me the following day, what did Ollie Breslin get? I'd be able to tell you. It just stick in my mind what he got. No, I couldn't remember a lot of things that I should have been remembering in school, but I could remember those type of things. Now, when we were young in the shop, I remember a few people, of interesting people who used to come into us. I remember Pat Taff coming in, the jockey who rode Arkle, and it was around the time he was riding Arkle, and we were fascinated by him. Charlie McCreevy, I remember him now, he was a customer at the time. And Brendan Corish, I remember Brendan Corish was in the shop one night. And the snooker player from Belfast.
Alex Higgins?
No.
Reardon?
No. This fellow used to drink quite a bit, and he was a whirlwind player. He used to play quite...
It's Alex Higgins, wasn't it?
Alex.
You used to call him
Yeah, Alex. Yeah, it is. There is Alex. Yeah, I remember we had him in the shop, Alec Higgins, in the shop one night now, and he was with some fella from Waterford. He was going to give an exhibition in Waterford, and I just thought, oh my God, how will he give an exhibition with the state he's in? Yeah, Alec Hurricane Higgins. Yeah, that's him.
He was an awful man for the drink.
Yes, and I said to myself, how could he go into? He was going. This might have been 7 o'clock now. He was going to give an exhibition someplace, and I said, don't think he'll be here for much tonight.
And was your family, you mentioned your mother used to get the Independent.
Yeah.
Were they Fine Gael people?
No, they weren't anything. They were, I suppose, they were God-fearing people. No, my mother, as a matter of fact, she was so God-fearing, she'd often be reading the paper and she'd say to us, I see where this man was acquitted of murder, she'd say. And I'd say, yeah. And she said, sure, if the guards charged him, he must have been guilty. You know, she'd think that if someone was charged, you had to be guilty. She didn't believe in someone giving evidence to the contrary.
And you were talking minutes ago about how you had to be fairly sharp in the shop as regards taking orders. Because it could be like 20 people.
Yeah.
Putting in orders, saying, bang, bang, bang.
Yeah.
Like, that's amazing ability, isn't it? To be able to kind of deal with all that all the time.
Yeah.
It's kind of like...
Because I used to often say to Marion, if we were out walking then the following day and we met someone who I had served in the shop the night before, and I'd say to her, just to annoy her, I'd say, that chap now got 4 fish and chips and a chip and 2 sausages last night. She wouldn't be impressed. But it was something that we learned, and just once I saw the person the next day, I'd know what they got. Now, we might have had 500 customers. Now, I might have served most of them. Probably did. And
that's amazing ability, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Now, one of the things that my father and mother, now, they didn't give us any kind of structured business advice. But my father always told us, if people come into the shop, he said, don't give them money, but don't let anyone leave the shop hungry. And he said, if someone is looking for cigarettes on credit, what you do is, he said, and if they're a customer, give them the cigarettes and say, there's a present for you. And they'll never ask you again. But if you refuse them, you'll lose their custom. And that was his theory, and it was good. But he said, never ever leave anyone out of the shop hungry.
And would you remember, we say particularly way back now, we say characters around Tramore that used to come in and get a bit of food or whatever. Would you remember different people?
Yeah. I try and think of who we used to have. We used to have one particular fella, now I don't know what his name was, but he used to do tricks. And he used to pour salt into his hand like that. And we could see him doing, he used to do it for us. And when he'd come in, we didn't ask him to do it. And he could always do that and there'd be no salt fall out. And we were looking at him right beside him, but he could do it. And he'd know when he'd come in, we'd ask him to do it. He'd pour the salt into his clenched fist like that. And be no salt. We could never figure it. And I thought magicians, you could look, if you saw it closely, you'd know but he was always able to do this. And I remember we used to have Brendan Grace in. Brendan Grace was a good customer of ours, and he used to always speak about us. When he was particularly in the Grand Hotel now, he would usually speak about us. And he'd say, one of the things he used to say is, I was up in Cunningham's, and the fish and chips, the fish was so fresh, he said. So when I opened the box, the fish had eaten all the chips. And I remember one night he was in the queue, and some woman was a woman looking at him. And she said, are you Brendan Grace? He said, I am. So she shook hands with him. And he said, now count your fingers. But he was particularly nice now. And my mother used to go in to see him down the Glen and the Forum. And if he saw her, he'd always mention her. And I remember the day my daughter got married in 2001 down in Faith Lake. And he had a concert in the golf club, across the road from the hotel itself. And he happened to be in the hotel, and he saw my mother, and he came over to her, and he was talking to her, and he's got a photograph taken with my daughter and her husband and that. And I remember the fellow who was organising the concert over in the golf club, he said to me, he knew me, and he said, if you don't mind, he said, we're paying 5,000 for this. He says, we're not paying for you to have him giving entertainment over here with your lot. So he took him away.
And was none of your next generation tempted to go into the business?
No. I suppose they saw it was so difficult.
7 days a week?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, kind of following up to something you said earlier, I remember saying to my daughter, who I won't tell you what age she is, but I said to her in recent years, I said, did you feel deprived when you were growing up that I was always working? And she said, no. She said, when we used to hear you coming in for your tea, we used to hide in case you gave us a job. So that answered that question.
So it was always all hands on deck?
Yeah. The only time we wouldn't be working is when we were eating, and or if we were away. There was no such thing. We never missed it. We never missed the 5-day week or anything.
But it was good the fact there was two brothers.
Yes.
That one could cover for the other. Also.
Yeah. And one of the things that we tried to do, we didn't have a structured plan, but what we tried to do when we were in the shop was that one of us would always serve the customer. And we worked on the principle that if you went to the bank and you wanted to see the bank manager, you'd have to make an appointment to see him, or he might summon you. But when you came into Cunningham's, one of the Cunninghams would always serve you. We tried to do that, and we almost succeeded in doing it 100%. So when you come into somebody's, if the principle is there, it seems so much better. So that was just something that, maybe they don't teach that in the Smurfit Business School. I don't know, but that's something we said. We'd like to serve every customer. And, we'd know them. The customer would expect us, even visitors would expect us to know them 12 months later when they came on their holidays to Tramore. And we kind of developed that theory that our mother had told us earlier about, even if you don't know the people, pretend you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about your suppliers? Who were your suppliers all the time? I mean, go way back.
One, the potatoes, it changed from time to time. We ended up in the last maybe 20 or 30 years getting them from a fellow in Kilkenny called John Spud Murphy. But we used to always get our fish from Flanagan's. And one particular thing about Flanagan's was In 1970, there was a bank strike, and it went from the 1st of May to well into November. And if you can imagine in 1970, there was no ATMs. So cash dried up. You know, we were getting cash into shops, but from our customers, you know, we were collecting cash, but we couldn't lodge it in a bank. And I remember John Whittle, the late John Whittle, that would be Brendan's father. Now, John Whittle is dead, but his father was John as well. In 1970, he came to my father and he said, you're collecting cash, we need cash to buy fish. So if we gave you checks, you give us the cash. Would that be okay? And my father said, that'd be great. It'll relieve us of the cash. And he used to tell everyone in the shop, when I was 19 at that time, we have no cash, we give it to people who are looking to cash checks, we cash them. So all we have is checks, so they're no good to, if you want to rob us, no good to you. But I remember at the end of the bank strike in November 1970, we had £49,000 worth of checks from Flanagan's. And I checked in the meantime to try and get some kind of a value on what £49,000 was in 1970. And I spoke to a woman in Sweetbriar, which was a lovely new housing estate in Tramore at the time. And she bought a big house for £5,000 in 1970. So we had more than 9 houses in checks in our safe. Now, we had lots of other checks as well, but we had 49,000 from Flanagan's, and not one of them bounced. None of the other ones either, but of course Flanagan's didn't bounce. And I said to my father, we'll be in some trouble if these checks bounce. He said, it's Flanagan's, it won't happen. Wasn't a mention of it. So we had more than 9 houses sitting in the safe. You told someone that now, this day and age, they'd be living in your house.
Yeah. So it was a long-standing relationship with these people?
Yes. Flanagan's were always our supply. Kern's frozen foods, we were very friendly with them. And they gave us wonderful service, and I'm sure they still give their customers wonderful service. I remember there was a couple of the people working in Kern's were from Tramore, and they were customers of ours. And if we needed anything on a Sunday, there's no problem, we could get it. And I remember a company from Cork came to Tramore, and they had a price list, and they were selling all of the same things that Kern's were selling. And they said, remember the fella telling me that we come to Tramore Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so we give a great service. And I said, do you not come on a Sunday? And he said, well, nobody works on a Sunday. I said, Kern's do. So that was him out. Service is you might be cheap, but service is the most important thing.
And just go back another question about when you were small, do you remember the train?
Oh yes, I remember being on the train. I was 9 when the train finished up. I can remember being on it, and I can remember I didn't have a seat the day. What I can remember, I was looking out the window in the end of the carriage. You know where the carriage where you went outside of looking out the window there, between the carriages, I suppose you'd call it. And I can remember we went into Manor Street, and I can remember Manor Street. And I remember all the fellas working on the Tramore Railway. And I remember one particular fellow who had a horse and cart, and he used to deliver goods from the train around the town, and he used to bring cigarettes on his horse and cart from the railway station up to the shop. Toddy Murphy. And we used to call him Mowler Murphy. Lived on the Priest Road. He was a very nice man, but we used to always climb on the back of the cart. It was quite low, and we used to sit on the back of it, and he wouldn't mind. And I can remember the goods yard where the down beside the railway station was kind of an extension of it, where they used to keep the goods. But I remember that well.
And just about one of the other things I meant to ask you too was about the dances. Do you remember the dances?
I do. Now, when I was a young teenager, 13, 14, I can remember the Royal Show Band being down there. And I wasn't in it, but I was outside. It might have been 1:30 in the morning. And I remember someone gave me a lift up where I could look in the window, and I saw the Royal Show Band playing. And I just saw the people. There were so many people there. I said, this is what close dancing means. That if you started dancing, you wouldn't be able to get out of it. I'm sure the fire officer now would have an opinion on it, but I couldn't believe that so many people could stand up so close together. And that's the one thing I remember about the Royal Show Band. The crowd that was there.
Where did you go dancing there yourselves?
I did afterwards, but it was almost finished. It was fading fast. I can remember being at Dickie Rock and the Miami. Remember that? And he sang the theme music from The Godfather. And I was with my present wife. But it was almost finished then. It was in serious decline at that stage. But I knew the bouncers, and I used to, when we'd walk past, we'd always be talking to them and that. We seemed to know everyone, you know, and maybe they knew us as well. I remember one day I was in a market, you know, a kind of a fruit closed market that they have in England in different cities. I was in one in Coventry one day. I was walking along and this woman shouted at me, "Fish and chips!" And I went back and I said, "Why did you say that?" She said, "I'm from Waterford, I know you," she said.
That's gas. And just now, looking back, I mean, I suppose, like, how do you see Tramore now? I mean, do you see it as the same as it was before in some ways, or do you see this change utterly, or what?
It's changed. Well, the centre of the town is changed. I think there's four families living on Main Street, which is a negative spin on it, I think. When people lived on it, they had pride in their buildings, they had pride in what went on the street. But that doesn't happen now, unfortunately. Probably the shopping has probably gone out of the centre of the town now. It's gone to the Summerhill Centre and on the outskirts. And of course even the outskirts of Waterford, people can nip in there now. But the fact that they're not living on the street, that's the unfortunate part, I think. And it's very, very advantageous to live on the street. People say to me now that I live up here, "Oh, it must be lovely living up here in a quiet place." When we lived on the street, you could get up in the morning, switch on the kettle, put on your toast, and go down and buy the newspaper. Come back and everything would be ready. But unfortunately, that's the way the town has gone. In fact, the Grand Hotel is gone. It's a big loss to the town. And to kind of give the thing about where we had to buy everything from our customers. When myself and Marion got married, we had the reception at the Grand, of course. We couldn't go beyond that. We had to do that. That was part of the culture we had. I suppose it was the forerunner to shop local.
Yeah. And that's Breeds had that, was it?
No, the Cusacks had it at the time.
Okay.
They had the Majestic.
Okay, Padraig, that's great. Thanks very much.
That's good.
That's really good to get a kind of especially because you were born in the centre of town. That's great. 'Cause
So I hope you can pick something out of that.
oh, we will,
Yeah.
definitely. That's really good.
Yeah. You're laughing. I can see you moving.
And so you're saying, I hope you can pick something out. There's loads in there. There's no shortage of things to pick out in there. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it was so rich and so much detail.
Yeah,
Like,
good.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
It was really wonderful.
And I love when you said about 2 trips in there.
Yeah.
You can know somebody.
But when Mark Crane was saying, Mark Crane works down in Dooley's now, and he said, "You'll never guess who I met the other day," and he was asking for you, and he'd tell us, you know.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
But I'm always amazed at those people that are right, the very first person you walk in and they're able to take that next. And you see it up in, I live up in Parental Street, and you see it in Walkers.